Thank you for joining me on this Friday. This is Josh of Severe Weather. I'm a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and I appreciate you joining me here. Hope everybody is excited for the upcoming holiday season. And we've got a lot of weather changes coming in the next couple of weeks. This video is going to talk about what's to expect coming up in January, maybe some real winter finally. But first, we're going to talk about what's going on in the shorter term. Then we're going to break down what's going to happen here in the month of January. So appreciate everybody joining me. Please like and share this with your friends. Please become a subscriber if you haven't already. Interesting spin up here in the central Atlantic west of the Azores, which are over here. It's not tropical. It's not going to become Tony, but looks pretty on satellite here. That is going to get absorbed by this front here that will be moving east of Bermuda and eventually picking it up. But definitely still some stuff going on in the Atlantic we need to keep an eye on, but nothing at this point that will develop. You can see here, there's a lot of dry air. That's these brown colors here surrounding this low pressure area. And as it moves east, it gets absorbed by our front. You can see the low pressure cycles back around here, and then over time it gets absorbed by a front by early next week. So nothing to really worry about. We do want to talk about what's coming, though, this weekend. That is the cold and the snow here. We've got an Alberta clipper that is moving through this area, low pressure heading up the coast. You can see temperatures are still near the average across the southern United States, but getting colder across the upper Midwest with single digits over parts of Minnesota and North Dakota. On top of that fresh snowpack, teens across portions of southeast Canada and northern New England. So that cold is coming south and east here. It's going to be a lot colder tonight, and especially tomorrow night into Sunday night here before we start to warm back up next week. Here's a look at the water vapor satellite. This picks up on mid and upper level atmospheric moisture. You can see troughs and ridges of high pressure with this, and hard to miss, but a big trough that's carved out across the eastern United States, upper level feature here. As that moves east, we are going to see low pressure forming and moving up the east coast. Now, if this were farther west, we'd be talking about a pretty significant east coast storm. It is going to clip the east coast, but primarily a storm for eastern Massachusetts, eastern Maine, and Atlantic Canada. It's forming, but a little bit too far offshore to be a really big storm at this point. But those of you across the Maritimes are going to be dealing with some really nasty weather here over the next 24 or so hours. Fast forward to next week, we see our next storm moving into the northwestern United States. This is going to track across the country. We're going to see more of a Pacific jet setting up here. So the cold air is going to retreat. The weather will turn more active. We're going to talk about heavier rain again. And we are going to have to watch potential winter weather here as we get to the second half of next week. Right now, the hazards map does show winter storm or weather advisories over the eastern Great Lakes, over the Appalachians, over the Poconos, and across parts of southeastern New England. We do have fog advisories as well across central California, and a freeze watch for tonight around South Georgia and North Florida here. Not a very busy map, but you're definitely going to notice the temperature drops here. Look at tonight's low temperatures, below zero in Minnesota and down into the teens in parts of New England. We start the weekend tomorrow below freezing for about a quarter of the country. Again, not unusual this time of the year, but certainly colder than it has been. As we get to tomorrow night, you'll see it's much colder across the Northeast and into parts of the Deep South, with the freezing line all the way down here close to the Gulf Coast, basically to Interstate 10, dropping into the 40s across Central Florida, mid-50s in South Florida, and we're below zero here as our storm moves away from parts of New England. As we head into the day on Sunday, it struggles to warm up quickly here. It will warm up, but still a chilly day across the southeast. Not terrible across Florida, but you'll need your jackets. And then Sunday night will still be pretty cold here with sub-zero temperatures over parts of New England. We will start to warm back up, though, here towards the beginning of next week across Texas and the southern plains. Here's that return of warmer air. It starts to gradually warm up. We're still looking pretty cold here, though, in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast for the end of the weekend. Here's a quick look at Monday. Back closer to average, still chilly in the east, but we're starting to get back to it. Here's Tuesday, Christmas Eve, and a lot of the country is going to be above freezing and above average. We're back into the 70s on the Gulf Coast. Here's Christmas Day, even warmer. Struggling to find temperatures that are below freezing in the afternoon, except in the higher elevations. And then the 26th remains pretty mild here. 60s and 70s in the south, 30s and 40s up north, 50s across the Carolinas and the Central Plains. and the West Coast will be on the cool side, but that is pretty much seasonal for this time of the year. Speaking of the West, I do want to start there before we shift things east. We're going to see some rain moving into the Northwest here tonight. Bigger storm moves on shore here in the morning, though. Early in the day, heavy mountain snow will build into the Siskiyou Range and the Cascades here during the morning tomorrow. Rounds of rain moving through Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. Then an even bigger storm system moves in on Sunday. And so every day we're dealing with another push of moisture that moves onshore. We continue to stay pretty unsettled over the Pacific Northwest. And look how much snow is expected to fall, up to 96 inches in the mountains of British Columbia and up to 48 inches in the mountains of California. All right, looking east, you can see our Alberta Clipper is moving eastward here, snow falling over PA, New York into New England, leftover snow falling in the Ohio Valley, and rain changing to snow in the lower elevations of West Virginia. Tonight, we are still going to have some instability and some snow falling, especially in northwest Indiana, western Michigan, off of Lakes Huron and Erie, and we may see a wave of snow here moving through New Jersey and the Philadelphia area before daybreak tomorrow morning. That could put down a little bit of accumulation. It'll quiet down tomorrow. We should see most of the snow winding down and a very quiet day as we get to Sunday as high pressure builds in. Here's a look at the potential snow through the night tonight, and locally very heavy over the Lake Huron area here. North of Sarnia. We are going to see a few inches over western Michigan, over northwest Indiana, over the UP, and also a few inches falling over the Smokies and the Blue Ridge here. Taking a look closer here at the Midwest, South Bend right here, we may see some flurries moving in for the game tonight. More snow overnight tonight, though, mainly in Lake County, Indiana, and in far southwestern parts of Michigan as well. So this is somewhat lake effect, somewhat just instability, some clouds. So definitely a cold, windy night across the area. Now, in the Northeast, we are seeing snow chances increasing here north of New York City, and that chance continues to grow here as the afternoon wears on in the Big Apple here and even into parts of New England. These amounts have come up from yesterday. You can see on the NAM model, we're seeing rain changing to snow by the end of the afternoon across Long Island and across much of Massachusetts. Turning into a decent storm here over eastern Mass, where we do have that winter weather advisory, and certainly across eastern and especially down eastern Maine, and then a big mess as well across the Maritimes of Canada, which we've been talking about here for a couple of days. Here's a look at the potential amounts from the NAM, now showing as much as 9 inches in the Boston area. If you look at the models I showed you yesterday, that total was only a couple of inches. It is shot way up here. So we could see a bit of a surprise in the Boston area. Now, is the NAM the only model in town? No. If you take a look at the official Weather Service forecast here, I'll get that back for you here. If you look at a blend of the models, we're talking about 4 inches of snow. So it has come up, certainly from yesterday's forecast. And, that doesn't surprise me. I've talked about the storm last week as well. But you can see here where it really picks up. It's offshore and across eastern Maine and into Atlantic Canada. Here's a look at Atlantic Canada. This is the Canadian model. And you do see snow falling here late tonight over Nova Scotia, even some sleet and freezing rain over Newfoundland, and then changing to rain, but heavy snow back across portions of Nova Scotia. And over the next 24 hours, we are going to see locally 20 to 30 centimeters near and northwest of Halifax, and even more across New Brunswick here for Saturday afternoon and Saturday night, moving up into Newfoundland. Locally, as much as 62 centimeters of snow could fall over the next 40-plus hours. Looking at the southeast, we have instability showers moving through the Carolinas here this evening, and then mountain snow tonight. It's going to wind down quickly, but a cold wind coming here for the weekend. Quiet weather expected, more sun for tomorrow, but take a look at some of these snow totals here in the mountains. We're talking as much as 6 inches on Mount LeConte and 1 to 3 inches in the western North Carolina mountains. Along the ridge and along the border with Tennessee, locally higher amounts. Parts of West Virginia are also going to pick up significant snow, 6 inches or more in the higher elevations. So nothing new here. It'll help the ski areas out again. But even parts of Kentucky and East Tennessee could see a little bit of snow here this evening. The other story is going to be the wind here tonight. It starts to pick up after dark and really ramps up here with gusts over 50 miles per hour possible on places like Mount Mitchell, Sassafras Mountain, and Grandfather Mountain. And then we see those winds staying up here through the night tonight, then coming down gradually tomorrow morning, and finally getting down to a more comfortable levels later tomorrow evening. But a nasty wind coming here. So that is the storm we're dealing with now. Things are going to change next week. As I mentioned, that storm that moves into the west comes into play. And this is Christmas Eve. We start to see unsettled weather across the south. We also have a weaker system moving across New England here for Monday and Tuesday that'll bring some snow with it into Atlantic Canada as well for Christmas Day. But the trend with this storm is that it's slowing down and running into more dry air. So the threat for something near and just after Christmas in the east is not as great, at least if you believe the GFS. Things are going to get delayed a little bit here, but we continue to have storm after storm here, especially in the central states through the weekend. Then eventually for New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, the East Coast gets it. And then we start to see much colder air coming down here at the beginning of the new year. And this is a very cold look to it. And I'm going to talk more about that here. Obviously, one model is not going to be correct every single time, but you see things are starting to shape up to be quite a bit colder here for the first weekend of January. I do want to talk about the storms we're going to get down south. I've heard a lot of chatter about severe weather. There will be a fair amount of lightning Christmas Eve in parts of East Texas here, moving down to Houston. Christmas Day doesn't look bad, but here's the next wave at night into Thursday. There might be a little bit of severe weather for Southeast Texas, Louisiana, maybe Mississippi here, and then things are going to shear out as they go east into the rest of the Southeast. So we don't see the chances for storms being nearly as great by the time we get to the end of next week or the weekend. Pretty slight chance at this point, but we're going to have to keep an eye on that. But here's what's to come afterwards, and this is pretty remarkable to see. It's not unusual, but it's remarkable. A very warm week next week. Strong high-pressure ridge aloft. That's the orange. We do have unsettled weather coming underneath of it, but take a look at this. That ridge sticks around until pretty much the end of the year, and then we start to see a big takeover with ridging in Canada and troughing across the central and eastern U.S. This indicates much colder air, much more unsettled weather will start to begin here around the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th of January. And that continues to build that first weekend of the month of January here. You can see on the longer term, look at this, a longer period of unsettled cold weather here over the central and eastern states. This is the first full week of January, and it doesn't stop then. It continues into the following week. And we don't see that ridge building right back in at all until we get later into the month of January. So there's a good 2 to 3 week period here where things could be open for quite a bit more winter weather and perhaps quite a bit of snow as well. The Arctic Oscillation is going to be negative as well from about the 29th here through about the 20th or so of January. So we're talking 2 to 3 weeks here where the cold stays on this side of the globe. The Eastern Pacific Oscillation is positive now, but goes back to negative. So we have the mild Pacific air for a week. Then we go back to a more unsettled pattern across the Great Lakes and east that shuts down the Pacific moisture when we go into that negative zone here. And that goes right through about the 20th or so. The NAO is positive now. That is, storms move around quickly here, but when it goes negative, we have more blocking setting up over Greenland, meaning storms have a chance of surviving the East Coast instead of getting kicked out. And so it's negative here at the end of the year. It stays negative into the beginning of next year and then climbs back to positive. And the area where it makes the jump from negative to positive is the area we typically see big East Coast storms. So this time frame is about the 10th to 20th of January. Now, obviously, I can't tell you exactly who's going to get what that far out in range. That's not possible, but I do know that the pattern does definitely favor something in that time frame. Here's a look at the temperature forecast here. It warms up quite a bit here next week, and then we start to see things cooling off at the end of next week into next weekend, and much of the country is going to be cold for the first full week of January as kids are going back to school, the second full week of January as well, and possibly into the third full week before we get the January thaw at the end of the month. Here's a look at where snow may fall, and I say may. You could see it doesn't look very exciting through the end of the year, but except in maybe the Northwest. But take a look at what's coming in January here. We start to see chances building farther south for that first week of January. Then the second week of January, we start to see more showing up in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes, and maybe even in parts of the Mid-South here for the second full week. Here's the third full week, and look at this. Things start getting a little bit more potentially exciting around the Great Lakes, around the Ohio Valley, maybe in the Mid-Atlantic area, into the Northeast as well. And this doesn't avoid the big cities of the Northeast. Now it's more to your north and west, as you might imagine, but this is a pretty good look here for a month out to see this kind of snow here showing up places like Chicago and Buffalo and Pittsburgh, and even places like DC, Philly, Baltimore, New York, Hartford, into Boston. So take a look at this. Remember the time frame I showed you all before where the NAO goes from negative to positive right around the 20th? Well, this is the week ending on the 24th. And that week of MLK Day on into the 20th or so has a threat, at least, for a winter storm. I can't tell you exactly how that's going to play out just yet, but it is looking somewhat more encouraging at this point. So that's what we're looking at here. The other thing I want to show you is the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. Very technical term, but it talks about how we go through interseasonal phases coming out of the tropics. And cold phases for the eastern U.S. are phase 8, 1 into 2. Now, we're not there right now. We're actually in phase 6. It's a pretty warm phase, to be honest with you. But you will see here as we head into those phases here, right around the 5th or so of January, and then heading into the 2nd, 3rd week. So right in here, we've got the opportunity for persistent cold and maybe some persistent weather. And as always, we've got time to watch that, but I want to give you all at least an update of what's to come here in the future, since many of you may be heading offline, traveling, being with your families. As always, I pray for your safety. I hope everybody has a healthy season. And I want to give all the honor and glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Romans 10:9, if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. And I just wanted to bring that joy to you today because I know we all struggle with our faith. We all struggle with what's going to happen next. We struggle with a lot of things here on earth. But the one thing that remains constant is that God is here to fight our battles. And if we declare our faith in him through Jesus, then he will save us from all the trouble that we have to deal with every day. So I hope you all have a great weekend. I may get a video out this weekend. I may not. We will have to see. But as always, I will keep you all posted on major weather events. Have a wonderful Friday. See you all soon. Take care.